Welcome back to the Casey Adams Show. Today I am joined by Val Katayev. Super excited to have you on the show, Val. You are quite the serial entrepreneur, and I've been following you on Twitter for quite some time now, so super excited to dive into your story.
Thanks, man. Great to be on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. So, as I just mentioned, you are quite the serial entrepreneur. You've been at this for quite some time, and again, I've been following you on Twitter, and I know one thing that you talk about is being a Bootstrap founder and growing to over 100 million across exits and revenue. And I want to start off by saying, for the people that might not know your story or follow you on Twitter like I do, where do you spend your time today? And then how did you get started in this whole world of business and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. So today I'm spending. So I have a holding company, and I have a number of different companies. Most of them I either co-founded or got really early on as a um, with a let's call it a controlling stake. And so that's one thing I have in my portfolio is kind of all these companies, and I have amazing CEOs operating all of them, so I don't have to spend a lot of my time. But where I spend most of my time today is a company called Jocalio, which is essentially I'm trying to build a backbone for the independent jewelers, which is a massive market that is very fragmented. But so we're trying to fix that and build a backbone for that industry. So that's where most of my time is spent on today. If you want to go back to how things started,
Yeah, where did this journey begin? And we'll definitely dive into the new company. But for you've co-founded and have operating stakes in so many different businesses. What was your first business, and what led you down the path of entrepreneurship?
yeah, good question. It kind of came. I'll be honest with you, it came a little natural to me. So I started early. My first business, well, actually, my first like somewhat of a real business was a content site. I had this like little website for PlayStation. Today it seems little, but back then I had something like 20,000 DAUs a day,
Wow.
DAUs, and and that's like late 90s was when I started it. I think I was 16 years old or so, 17 years old. And I mean, that's like when I just got my computer for the first time. I never had a computer before. I believe, 16 years old is when I got my computer. So it started from there, and then kind of the bubble burst. That website, I didn't know how to generate revenue. Lost 90% of its revenue because all the kind of like the ad networks lost all the advertisers. So I had to
Yeah.
scramble and figure out how to generate revenue. All the traffic that I had was generating nothing. So I learned how to sell ads, and then I realized that those same ads I needed more inventory for. One thing led to another. I kind of start selling those ads on other websites that are bigger than mine, and then like it eventually led me to search advertising, which was an unknown category. This is like before Google was a thing. That was my first really successful business where I generated like a real big profit. I did it all out of my parents' basement,
Wow. That's
and
so cool.
yeah, so that's kind of like where that like I was lucky enough that allowed me to invest into my other businesses one after another. So I never had to raise money, and I was lucky to be able to bootstrap each one of my companies.
I think that's such a powerful thing, especially in today's age, right? And also in today's market, right? Like founders that can be scrappy and not have to go raise capital. In my opinion, I think it's a powerful thing for founders to go through, and you learn to work with less. And actually, again, you're scrappy and you have to make it work. And when you were getting the game of business, I think nowadays, especially with Twitter, right? You see all these companies raising these massive rounds, especially 2021. What was your idea on venture capital? Because I know you preach so much about bootstrapping your businesses, and that's been your journey. But getting the game of business, has that even ever crossed your mind, or has that been an avenue that you wanted to pursue, or was bootstrapping always your your game from the get go, and you've never looked back?
Look, when I started, I didn't know what's a VC or raising money means. Like I didn't know any of that stuff. I was a kid,
Yeah,
right? So it was never a thought out process. It was again. I started like in the late '90s, early 2000. So the VCs weren't like a thing. I mean, I knew that were VCs only because once the .com
yeah.
like tech companies start showing up on going public, you kind of start seeing who's backing all those companies. But I always thought I was like, hey, that's like for the big boys. I was that's not for me. So I never really never thought about that as a concept for me, at least, to rely on to build my business. And then later on, it's just as I started every business, yes, I started thinking like, hey, should this be the business that I take on some VC money? And every time it was like, hey, you're used to operating a certain way. If unless absolutely necessary, let's put my money where my mouth is and put my own capital on the risk,
Yeah.
my own capital on the line, and risk it all the way. And so that's kind of like what I've done since. So far, I haven't had to raise VC money, but there. I don't want to speak against it, because I think there's some ideas out there that are just too big for any one individual to finance. And even if you're successful, I mean, there are plenty of opportunities out there. There's just no way I have, the deep enough pockets to finance. So I just haven't had the need for that yet.
Yeah.
Again, that's my personal situation, but I love doing it. I love the control of it, and I love being able to kind of control my own destiny. And so that's, to some degree, it's a preference as well.
Absolutely. No, I love that perspective there. And yeah, I want to talk about this idea of having a portfolio. As you said at the beginning of this conversation, you have incredible CEOs running these different companies. What was that process going from, working in the business to now working on businesses, finding CEOs to run these organizations? And, what have you learned through that process? Because that is A, not easy, but B, you've been doing this for quite some time now. And I would love to dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, today I have three CEOs who operate three different companies. Like, again, bigger parts of my portfolio. And the first one, he's actually a co-founder. Although I was CEO of that company first, and but that was at a time I was actually CEO of three companies at once.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I was a CEO of.
And
So you got to
what were
think about
those?
this. I went from working from the basement, right, building a pretty successful business, and then starting a company, and then spinning off two other companies off of that. And I ended up being CEO of three different companies with three different sets of shareholders all at the same time.
Wow.
And at one point, somebody came along and decided wanted to acquire two of those companies at once, because two of them were like music related. And
Yeah,
somebody came
for
along.
those that may not know, I'd love to just quickly recap. Like, what were those three companies when you were CEO of all of them? Were they aligned across different verticals, or what were they?
So yes, so okay, so the first business I started was the whole paid search advertising business, right? I never sold that business. That kind of like kept going, and then once I came across my second business, which was essentially promoting premium content such as ringtones. If you ever looked up lyrics and then like came across a ringtone ad, I was probably like, I had a monopoly on that in 65 countries,
So
and we,
cool.
we were in front of a 500 million people every month just pushing ringtones
Wow.
across all these sites. It was a huge success, very profitable. I mean, we generated over $10 million in our first year of profit, and at
And
first I was doing it alone, and then I kind of merged somebody into my company, and ended up being just the six of us essentially, or seven of us with a developer, that we built this whole thing. And so that kind of spawned. So that's kind of like the ringtone music content space, right?
yeah,
And very quickly, about a year into that, we noticed two trends. So one trend was mobile. We're talking about 2009. We realized that like all these smartphones start popping up, and that's a whole different ball game when it comes to advertising. So we launched a mobile advertising network at the time, and this is before like the iPad existed. Like I forgot which iPhone came out, but that was like back in the days of probably the first iPhone that came out, probably. And so that was Mobile Fuse. So that Mobile Fuse, I have a co-founder in. That's the
yep.
company that's around today, and that's like we have like 100 people. It's probably going to do, it's very successful as a business, and it
Yeah,
has like Fortune 1000 companies as clients. The other business we spun off was, I looked at all those music sites that were on our network that comprised of 500 million people every month. I looked at those sites, and like the ads we would take were like these little text ads promoting the ringtones. But I looked at all everywhere else, and what I saw was display advertising space, largely taken up by Google. Like, and it was just these like ugly text ads in big boxes. I
yep.
was like, man, this is not a great experience, right? So we figured like, hey, what would happen if we take all these sites, or at least all the best sites, we legitimize them, because a lot of lyric sites that were at the time not licensed properly, or weren't
Mm-hmm.
licensed, frankly speaking. And we said, okay, hey, we're going to make you all this money if you get your content licensed properly. We're going to take your content now to brands and package it up as one selling, right? So we would have one media kit, which is Tone Media, which is the name of the company that we spun off, and Tone Media would represent all these music sites that we would sell. So we sold it to like Pepsi's of the world, and Pepsi ran a Super Bowl commercial with us. Um, so it was like really exciting. We single handedly actually turned the lyrics category, which was the second biggest category of biggest searched category. I don't know if a lot of people know this. The biggest search category after sex is lyrics.
Wow.
At least it was at the time. I don't know if that's still the case today. It might still be the case, but that's the biggest category. And it was fully unlicensed. No lyric sites was licensed at the time. The content wasn't licensed. That's why all the owners were like in Russia, Romania, China, all these places you can't touch those owners. And so we single-handedly legitimized that whole space.
Wow.
And today, if you go to any lyric site, it is licensed and it's paying royalties to publishers and songwriters. And that's actually, I don't think I ever kind of really said it that way.
No, that's
Podcast,
very well said.
Yeah, and that's it was a huge deal, because like the music industry was chasing these sites for like decades. I mean, they were trying to shut them down.
Yeah,
No, it was like a whack-a-mole game.
No,
Yeah. So anyway, so the Tone Fuse spun off Mobile Fuse and Tone Media, and then I sold Tone Fuse and Tone Media all in one shot. And like I stayed on with the new owner for a bit, and next, I decided to retire. So I went from being a CEO of 3 companies to 0 all in one shot almost. And yeah, so and then kind of got bored, and after 3 years of doing that, and then launched the current company that I'm running today. But that's kind of how like
so cool.
the thing started. Look, I found these CEOs.
Yeah.
Like I said,
So how did you find these CEOs? And coming out of, just to regroup on this question here, you sell these companies, you retire, you take time off, you transition into that. Now you're finding qualified CEOs and running this holding company, but also launching this new company, Jacalio. How do you spend your time now in terms of managing and also building a new company? Because I think that skill set learned over the years can be passed on to younger CEOs that may be looking to build a portfolio company, or a portfolio of different companies one day. So I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think there's a magic bullet for this, as an answer. Like for me, those 3, the Mobile Fuse was, I guess, I was lucky to have a co-founder who was really smart, and I just we decided to switch, from me being the CEO to him taking over, and
Yeah.
he's a really smart guy and has done an amazing job, that growing that company. The fund management business that we have out in San Francisco kind of came into that by accident a little bit, because when I sold my companies, I needed to invest somewhere. And I really wanted to invest my money into marketplace lending, and that just kind of happened that I ended up going into a fund, and then the fund was like very new. Really liked the manager, but I think he was managing it for about a year at the time, and he had like maybe like 9 million under management. So I was like, hey Don, I'll put money in, a bunch of money into this into the funds, but I also want to buy into the business, like a real stake of it. So I want to be a partner in this business. And so that's kind of how that happened. So he was already the CEO. So, and I'm not technically
cool.
co-founder, but I'm a pretty big partner in the company since then.
And I appreciate the perspective. I think just like understanding that, getting involved, deals, and how things all work in different settings is very interesting, especially in my opinion. So I appreciate the insight there. I would love to talk about your new company. You talk about empowering independent jewelers through innovation at Jacalio. What does that mean to you, and where did you see this opportunity? Because thinking back and hearing your story in terms of ringtones and being ad networks, you've seen a lot of things early, and you've capitalized on these opportunities in many, many different ways. So what do you see in this new market that you're now building in?
Yeah, so what I see is, look, I'm always looking for. I love distribution, right? So when I looked at what I want to do next, and I was like, hey, I kind of want to do something that's fragmented, not like corporate America. I've done this like over and over. Maybe not so much ad tech, like because again, I've done that multiple times now, like advertising related businesses.
Hmm.
So I wanted to kind of help the something independent, like small businesses, right? So I came across the jewelry industry, and I was like, man, that's a $300 billion industry, very fragmented. Huge chunk of it is in the U.S., and a huge chunk of it in the U.S. is independently owned. Now, a lot of these stores are not like mom and pops that are doing $500,000 in revenue. They're actually doing 5, 10 million, 20 million, $30 million from each location. So it was fragmented, but it was also kind of like they're big enough where they could afford to do what I need them to do together.
Hmm.
So that's where the idea came from. It's like, hey, how do we build a distribution channel, but also to help and elevate that whole network of or create a network of essentially these stores so that we could help them go up against the majors.
No, that's very cool. And so with that company, how do you think about, launching a company, especially in this new different industry and understanding this massive opportunity? Like, what's your game plan when launching a company? How do you go about it? Team building, culture, etc. Like, how do you as a founder get ready to launch something? Because not only have you done it again successfully, but I think just understanding your perspective on that I would learn something from that, and I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's a good question, especially like in the jewelry industry where a lot of people in the industry are used to operating a certain way, and the cultures are just like a certain way. We really kind of had to figure out how to bring a new set of um, it's not of rules, but like how to do things differently. So I really wanted to figure out how to change the paradigm of this industry, and like we had to question everything. Why is something done a certain way? Because when you come into this industry and you hire all these experts who've done this for decades and decades, one problem that comes with that is they want to do a lot of times the same things they're used to doing for the last 30 years, right?
Yep.
And it's very hard sometimes to push back and say, hey, like, well, why? Like, why it has to be that way, you know? Well, that's because that's the way it's done. Well, then you have that conversation about, well, let's untangle that and, see if there's a different way to do this. And, look, you're not always going to be right because sometimes there isn't no different way to do it, just for many reasons. But half the times you do change things up and you do it differently. And, putting together a culture, I definitely want to always have the right people, not just the right people actually, but like the positive people around
Yeah.
us and around the company. Because no matter how good you are, and it's like that, like negative energy always hurts. Like I know that I get I get dissuaded whenever there's negativity, and
Hmm.
it bothers me personally, and I don't want that in my company either. So that is definitely something I look at when starting a new company.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And, I interviewed one of the co-founders of Mad Happy today, which is a clothing brand. And, their brand stands for everything about optimism, positivity,
I love
and like
that.
that's their beliefs. And they've done some incredible collaborations over the years. And this is just top of mind because I had this conversation this morning, but I would love to hear, some of your core values as a founder when building a team, when looking for, these different CEOs, and core values that you are just a huge believer in that have led to your success in your mind.
Yeah, look, one of the things that kind of a common thread in a lot of people that have worked with me is not necessarily for me to look at like Ivy League schools or like the education. Like, I mean, and we don't get me wrong, we have people like that as well, and they're amazing. But I'm not like filtering for that. And I can tell you that my first developer that I worked with, my at the time of the second business already, you know, I literally called him up and we had this conversation. He just went to college. I started working with him when he was in high school, and I found him on some like um, on a forum, like back when
Yeah.
forums existed. And I found him on a forum, and he just started freelancing for me. And then he went to college, and like a few months into his school, maybe a year into school, I'm like, "Dude, you like school?" He's like, "Yeah, it's all right." And I'm like, "Why don't you just come work for me?" And he was in Wisconsin. I'm like, "Hey, come on, I'm gonna move to New York, and come work with me." He's like, "Cool, let's do it." and he just quit. So like I didn't
Wow.
care. I never cared about the formal education. And again, I think I started working with him when he was like 16, maybe 15, as a freelancer.
Wow.
So it comes down to like having people that it's easy to speak with. Like a lot of you ever get that when you have people on your team that could finish your sentence or already know what you're thinking
For
before you even
sure.
start, even started saying more than 3 words, right?
Yeah.
And also like just so much easier to work with because you don't have to explain everything and detail everything. And that's like probably one of the parts where my weakness is like I'm not great at putting it together presentations and PowerPoints and documenting everything. That's not me. Like I'm not like that organized. So having people like that around me that kind of get the vibe and understand what we're all trying to build, at least for me personally, saves a lot of time and kind of works out and
Yeah.
for the best.
Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to pivot and talk about something that has, led to this conversation, which is personal brand, right? I've been following you on Twitter. I've read all your threads, and you put out some awesome content just around everything entrepreneurship, building businesses, your experience as an operator, as someone that has, was the CEO of 3 different companies, has this awesome portfolio, currently launching a new company. How have you found time, and why have you found time to build a personal brand and to just put out the content that you do, especially on Twitter, which is where I mainly follow you?
Yeah. Good question. I was always under the radar. Stayed away from kind of putting out like content or anything like that. It kind of happened also by accident. Like a lot of things in my, my life. I just kind of roll with the flow. I think I've shared it before. I met Sam Parr, and he kind of blurred something out on his podcast. Kind of made a whole segment about me, and without checking with me, which is a joke we keep talking about. So that's kind of like the first time. And then he kept telling me like, dude, you got to tell your story. You got to love your stories. You got to share them, right? And a lot of people could really use that knowledge and you would help a lot of people. So, and I didn't really take it seriously at first. And one day I was like, hey, let me try this thing. And he's like, write a thread. I did it and
Yeah.
it just took off and and I just started. I just kept going with that. I was like, all right, let me just keep rolling with this thing. And look, I don't know. Like, I don't. It was really, it's really hard to find time to do this, and it was really hard to find time to start in the beginning as well. So it's, I didn't have an agenda, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And a lot of like, I even get those DMs like, hey man, like you must be full of it because who has the time to write their stories when you have all this money? Like I get stupid stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. Like I don't really have an agenda. I'm just out there. I don't have like I'm not collecting leads. I mean, it helps once in a while. Like you'll write a story about your fund management business, and all of a sudden, like the company gets a bunch of investors reaching out to the company.
Yeah.
And the CEO of that company is like, dude, we just got like 25 leads,
Yeah.
from that thread you wrote, and that wasn't, that's not necessarily the focal point of why I do this, but that happens once in a while. A lot of the stories that I sold the businesses, that doesn't give me anything in terms of
Yeah.
business. But yeah, look, I mean, I just want to put out value there. I'm in a situation where I'm blessed to be where I am, and I don't really need much else. I'm doing this for fun. It's like a fun game, and if I could share my knowledge and people could learn from my mistakes or from my successes, then I did something good, I think. But that's really the only motivation.
That's very great
And,
perspective.
and dude, thank you. So thank you for following my
Of
content and
course, no,
threads and all that stuff.
absolutely. Your content's so great. And speaking of the content itself, but more so the what led you to creating that content is the successes and the different stories. And I want to talk about the acquisitions in your life and how they've changed your mentality in terms of being from an operator to then working inside of a company, whether that's from a financial perspective or just from an operating perspective. Like how did an acquisition change your life, your mentality on business, and your workflow? And what did you learn from your first acquisition?
So I only had one acquisition process that ended up selling two
Yep.
companies at once. Okay. So again, separate teams, separate shareholders on those two companies, but I sold them all to one company all in one shot. All right, so I really never went through more than one. Well, I went through a process before that, not before, after that, for another business that they didn't finalize, didn't close out.
Got it.
But I only sold once. And what I've learned is, when you're running your own business, especially with a smaller team, the it's very different compared to coming into an established business, where especially usually those are bigger companies. And like when I got acquired, it was by a bigger company, and they helped me. They asked me to stay on as a CEO of the advertising division, and it was very different for me. There's a bit more politics involved. People, a lot more teams, a lot more people, and you kind of have different teams working on different things, and you're trying to find your strength and put together the right team for you that will get certain objectives met, but to meet certain objectives. Yeah. And so things are very different when you're working in a kind of corporate America. Even if it's not like a huge corporation, it's not the same as 20, 30 people, versus 200 people. Organization is going to be very different.
Totally. No, I totally get it. Because I know we were jamming out before this. Like my company that just got acquired, we were a team of 8, 9, and now the company Valor Nation that we're working at is just over 300. So it's completely different, and it's that learning process has been real for me, which has been very cool. But when it comes to not only the personal brand, but you had this story. You talk to these different entrepreneurs in terms of the content you put out, and it's inspiring. And I know you didn't have like an exact end goal for content. It came into your life just by accident. What do you recommend for either founders starting out or experienced founders when finding time to create content, and why have you continued to do it, right? When it comes to the impact, that's one thing, but like what fuels you from a content creation aspect? Because I've had lots of different creators on the show. But I think for every business owner that's creating content, they always have a different core reason as to why, in terms of the value and what they're getting out of it. So I'd love to hear that perspective from you.
Yeah, what drives me on the content side is, like I said, just putting out the value there. Where do I get inspiration for a lot of the content? It's it's work.
Yep.
I definitely have some people help me with kind of the research of the content, but I'm very involved in the content itself, writing and editing. Sometimes I'll spend time just making sure that, hey, is this what I want to put out there? Because I'm trying to stay away from anything too controversial. Although sometimes that happens, but I'm always looking for educational, right? Whether it's educational based on my past, or educational because I learned something from somewhere else, and I'm like, hey, let me put this framework together, and kind of like some of my mentalities that I use to build my businesses. So that's what I want to stand for. I know for some other people, it's a valuable tool. Like I spoke to Alex Hormozy. For him, it's a great tool for lead generation because he's looking to acquire businesses all the time.
Yeah.
For his company. And and he's obviously blown up. So I know it's a very powerful tool.
Yep.
I'm probably just kind of scratching the surface on it. But if I were to tell anybody something like, look, for me, it kind of worked from the start. I put out something and it just took off. If it didn't take off, my first thread didn't take off, I probably wouldn't keep putting time into it, because I'm the person that tests something, let's see how it goes, and then look at the results, and maybe I'll test it again if I really feel like there might be I've done something wrong. Let me iterate something. But if my first story went completely on deaf ears, right? I'm not in the business of creating content.
Yep.
I probably would have said, okay, this is probably not there's probably no interest in this, right? And I wouldn't be so focused on it. Now, if you're in a business of content, or your business could use content to generate leads, and that's an important engine for yourself or for your business, then you got to stay on it and you got to keep going. Just for me, it wasn't the case, right? So like if I failed my first try or my second try, I probably would have walked in because I have a lot of other
Yeah.
things to do. Because this is not working.
I find that so ironic because, like the typical content path is like things usually don't work at the beginning. And it's so funny because, you're the type of person where if it wouldn't have worked, you probably wouldn't have done it. Therefore, it worked like a charm and you had something very impactful. I think that's so great and so
I
ironic.
think I think in the first, I don't know how old my Twitter account is. Probably, I don't know if it's 8 years old or something, but whatever. Like whatever number of years I've had Twitter, I think I had 1,000 followers all those years. And then and that's just from being around.
Yeah.
And then that first thread that I posted got me like 12 or 20,000. No, I think like close to 20,000
Oh my
followers from the
gosh.
first thread.
What a
So
hit.
yeah, so it did all right,
Yeah.
and so I decided to keep going. Um,
That's so great. I love to
yeah.
hear that. When it comes to your experience as an entrepreneur and looking back, you got into this world of business at a very young age from, these different from the gaming side of things. What advice would you give to yourself if you were restarting today, bootstrapping, don't have money? This is your specialty. You've done it since the get. You're betting on yourself. For young entrepreneurs that are starting a business in 2023, especially with, what's happening in the market, and bootstrapping is a phenomenal thing to do right now, especially with everything that's again changing in the VC landscape. What advice would you give to yourself, and then advice to young entrepreneurs? And that could be the same thing. Who knows?
Yeah, look, it's tough, right? There's so much more competition these days, but at the same time, there's so many more opportunities. So a lot of times you kind of think about it like, yeah, like you started it when there was less competition, 20 years ago. But at the same time, the opportunities were also very few. There were a lot less tech companies. There was a lot less audience. There were a lot less tools. There's a lot less information. There was nobody to talk to. So it's like, there's a I feel like there's a wash, right? And today the opportunity, if you could come across the right opportunity, the ceiling is so much higher. Meaning you could reach so much more. You could generate so much more. You could generate so much value and reach so many more people today. If I was, and I'm always, the way I always look at things, hey, where can I bring value to kind of arbitrage my time a little bit, but learn at the same time? And, if I have certain things that I understand how to do, start there, right? Work on those, whether it's one or two clients, whether it's on your uncle or whoever, like just think about like what people always ask you to help with, whether it's your friends, your uncles, or your whatever. And that kind of should give you direction, what you're good at, plus what you like to do, because it's hard to do something when you're not liking it. Um, so I would focus in that direction first, and if you could apply that to something that is very scalable, today you look at like TikTok and Reels on Instagram or YouTube Shorts, whatever, like just from content perspective, you know, I would focus on that just because there's just a vast amount of you know audiences and resources available that you could unlock and put things together. Like I always look for distribution also,
Yeah.
right? So if I could find a bunch of distribution, whether it's through influencers, and maybe if you're good at creating brands or kind of creating interesting content on your own. I was never good at creating content, right? So I would actually like to aggregate other people's content, whether it's
Yeah.
other websites or whatever. Like I was not that great at actually creating my own audience. I was good at aggregating other people's audiences, and then I would monetize them. So it's not, for everybody's a little different, but yeah, I mean, obviously, there's just like a huge, vast potential on places like TikTok today that I think
Yeah.
we still haven't seen all of what's going to be done there.
Totally. No, I feel like I've been in the social landscape for 6 years now, like putting out content and everything. And it just feels like every year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're just like, I've realized, wow, like this is not only a long-term play, but it's something that's just taking over in such a unique way right now over the last couple of years with shorts and all the short form content blitz that I would say is going on. But, a couple
Yeah,
more questions.
in this show, right? Like just perfect example. I think this show is part of a network, right?
Yeah, it is. Blue Wire Podcast Network.
Blue Wire. So I actually spoke to the CEO or founder of Blue Wire,
Kevin.
Kevin. Yeah, cool guy,
Yep.
a really great, smart guy. And that is the perfect example. Like he took a bunch of influencers, right? A bunch of podcasts. I think they're heavily into sports.
Yeah, it's like 95% sports, and then
Yeah,
small
and I
business
mean that's a
segment.
perfect example. Like what I would personally do if I wasn't like the content. I would aggregate. Everybody else is great about creating content, like like Casey and whoever doing sports. Get them together into one network. Get them packaged up because it's much easier to sell to brands. It's easier to create, right? Like so that's a perfect
Totally.
example how I view like the how I view new opportunities and how I would put things together. So for me, it was really cool. Kevin actually reached out, and
That's awesome.
I think he saw one of my threads as well on Twitter.
Love to hear
Very
that.
interesting. I never heard of Blue Wire
Okay.
before.
Yeah, Blue Bars, I mean, you hit it right on the nail, right? It's like the aggregation, what they've done in sports, and then, for them, it's like testing out different shows in business and these different segments of aggregation. I think it's very smart, and Kevin, he's been incredible to work with.
So actually, I'm
invite him.
not going to take too much time on this, but actually, I just remembered how I connected with him. I was in Vegas. I was staying at
The
the
Win.
Win.
Yep.
And I was there at an expo, and I kept passing by something called Blue Wire. It was like a little studio, and I was like, "What the heck is Blue Wire?" Right? Never heard of it. Whatever. And just I came back. I think probably 2 days later, after I came back from Vegas, I saw Kevin follow me, and I think he had the check mark, and I must have noticed it, and it said founder of Blue Wire. I'm like, "Whoa, what a coincidence!" Like the guy, and I don't know what the hell is Blue Wire. So we connected, and I learned that it's actually this whole like network. They just happened to have a space in at the Win.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I'll go out to the Win like every month or two. Just depends on schedule, and like they have that beautiful studio as a podcaster, part of the network. You can pop out there whenever, and it's been a great place to not only bring guests, but you saw the studio. They partnered with the Win on it. They invested a lot of money into the production side of things there. So I'm super glad you saw that, right? And they've used that, right? Like for this network of aggregating shows, it's like such a value add for these shows that are part of the network for podcasters like myself that are looking to go to a beautiful spot to record. So great perspective for sure.
And obviously makes a lot of sense with gambling, and especially nowadays with sports and gambling. I mean,
no, absolutely. Well, a couple more questions before we wrap up, Val. Just looking into the future, 2023 and beyond, what excites you right now, and what opportunities do you see in the market? Right, like you saw so many things early in life. Of course, the buzz around AI, everyone's hearing it and seeing it. But what excites you nowadays, and then what are you excited about within your own portfolio of companies?
Look, I'm usually not the guy to fall or go after like buzzy things, right? Like to me, Web3 was kind of like a little too buzzy, to be honest with you, and I never really focused on that too much. I mean, there's been great applications, don't get me wrong, but I think it just kind of a lot of applications or businesses were kind of being forced and just to put a Web3 moniker on, just to be in that bucket, right?
Yeah.
So I hate to talk about it, but this whole AI thing, the AI stuff is just, it is the one like I could get behind that, right? I think it's just way more than just buzz. And the reason I'm saying that is not because I keep seeing it everywhere on Twitter or content or social media, whatever. I'm seeing how it's penetrating my businesses. And it's not just penetrating from the perspective of, hey, Val, the founder or CEO, is pushing anything down on the teams to use. I'm seeing the teams kind of, and not just like the teams that report to me, but even lower down, are bringing that. And it's like, hey, we could use like ChatGPT for this, and we could use AI for this. So it's kind of taking off in a way I've never seen before in any of my businesses before. Nobody came to me talking like, hey, can we tokenize and put this on a blockchain, right? Like nobody's done that in any of our businesses. I mean, we kind of, it's always something that we would chat, me, my co-founder, maybe my C-level suite, like we would talk about, hey, like, should we be looking at crypto or should we do anything with the blockchain? But again, it was like very top down, very high level. I've never seen anything like AI penetrating from all sides of the business and across all teams. So I think we're just starting to see the beginning of it. It's actually pretty exciting. And again, I can't believe I'm like getting behind something that is buzzy.
No, it's a great perspective. It's a
yeah,
great perspective of like, it's the bottom up, right? It's like, you're not forcing this down everyone's throat. It's it's coming to you and you're seeing the impact of it, so you can't ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. So I can't ignore it, and I have to say that is the it's gonna shape the shape the industries and our industry or any industry in for years to come.
I totally agree, and that's very very cool perspective hearing that in terms of how the teams approach and how you've seen it. So, with that being said, Val, I want to leave it open for you at the end to not only say thank you for coming on the show today, but where is the best place that the people listening or watching can stay connected with you, learn more about your businesses, and of course, follow you on Twitter to get all the value that you put out on social.
Yeah, I started actually putting out videos on TikTok and Instagram. We'll probably push it out to YouTube Shorts as well. So if you want to catch my video content, go to TikTok or Instagram. I'm there. You know, I write all my stuff obviously on Twitter, so that is the kind of like where you find the threads and kind of the longer formats. So you'll find me on any of those platforms.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to link all that down below, Val. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. Really appreciate everything you do and all the value that you put out. And your story is quite impactful. So I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Casey.
Of course.